The courtroom felt suffocating, blanketed in a silence so thick it nearly swallowed sound. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Diddy sat motionless at the defendant's table, his attorneys murmuring urgently beside him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. They weren't in this room. They were buried under weeks of pressure, public judgment, and the relentless weight of what had brought him here. It was time. One final testimony, one final shot to be heard not just by the court or the jury, but by the world. But the question wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was deeper. Who would he be once this trial was over? Diddy had built a kingdom? From Harlem's corners to the heights of the entertainment industry, his climb was nothing short of legendary. But in the spotlight's glow came shadows. And now that once untouchable empire looked paper-thin under the weight of truth. The courtroom wasn't just a stage for criminal charges, it had become a mirror. And the reflection staring back was complicated. Fraud, deception, control. The prosecution had carved at him day after day with brutal precision. His defense had returned, fire countering each blow. But Diddy knew this moment wasn't about strategy. It was about legacy. It was about facing something he had outrun for years. Redemption. Before we pull this story deeper into the light, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon, and like this video. We're not done. This is just the beginning. Then Diddy stood. His heartbeat thundered as he approached the witness stand. The noise in the room vanished, pulled into a vacuum of expectation. His lawyers exchanged glances. None of them knew what he was going to say. He had rehearsed everything. But what was coming now that wasn't on the script? When he spoke, his voice didn't shake. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he looked out at them not as a mogul, but as a man. I've spent most of my life chasing a version of myself, a version people could admire. One they couldn't touch, but I've made mistakes, big ones, and I'm not here today as the image I built. I'm here as the man I've become, one who's ready to tell the truth, no matter what it costs. His words dropped like weight onto the room. And for a moment, everything paused. No shifting in seats, no pens moving. Just stillness. He wasn't asking for mercy. He wasn't angling for a deal. This wasn't performance. This was reckoning. I know what people think of me, he continued, his voice sharpening. I've built something powerful, but I've also torn trust apart. I've hurt people I cared about. I ran from that for years, but now I'm standing here to own it. I can't rewrite the past, but maybe I can start making it right. You could hear hearts pounding, eyes locked on him, and then he dropped something no one saw coming. There's more, he said, lowering his voice. I've made my share of mistakes, yes. But there's something I've never said, something that's been eating at me for years. Someone who stood beside me, someone I thought I trusted, They betrayed me. And I've kept that secret buried until now. Gasps, audible, real. The room rippled. Had he just implicated someone? A member of his legal team, his inner circle? The gallery buzzed under its breath as reporters frantically scribbled down what might become the headline of the decade. This wasn't just a confession, it was a fracture in the narrative, a twist that changed everything. Diddy stood there, holding their gaze. Around him, the courtroom froze in collective disbelief. Jurors stared, lawyers blinked. And in that stillness, it became clear no one was prepared for this. Not his defense team, not the prosecution, not the world watching from behind screens. He wasn't just responding to charges now. He was lifting the veil on something far more dangerous. Truth. His lawyers stood paralyzed. This wasn't in the playbook. This wasn't what they'd prepared for in those endless pretrial nights. They had expected a carefully crafted statement. Not this, not betrayal, not bombshells, but Diddy. He wasn't following the plan anymore. He was done hiding. I spent decades building this name, he said, turning toward the jury now. But somewhere in the rise, I stopped seeing the fall. My ambition blinded me. I pushed good people away. I trusted the wrong ones, and I hurt the ones who never deserved it. His voice faltered just slightly as the weight of what he had just admitted began to settle in. I didn't only betray them, he said, voice tightening. I betrayed myself. The words lingered like smoke. I got lost in the illusion of who I thought I had to be, and in chasing that, I lost sight of the people who helped me build everything. His eyes lowered. I pushed them away, used them, tossed them aside like they were nothing. The hardest part, he knew he could never rewind the clock. Never fix the damage done. The people he had hurt, some of them couldn't even tell their side of the story anymore. And yet, here he stood, no longer running. I can't hide from it, he said, and I won't. The air shifted. The walls of the courtroom seemed to lean in, as if the building itself understood that something real was happening. Something rare. This wasn't about fame. This wasn't about fortune. This was a man laying his soul bare in front of strangers, in front of the world. The prosecutor wasted no time. He sprang from his chair like a man waiting for blood. Your Honor, he snapped, voice cutting through the moment like glass. We can't let this spiral. Mr. Combs has made this courtroom his personal therapy session long enough. We are not here for his regret. We are here for accountability. For justice. Let's not lose sight of that. The words stung. The courtroom shifted. But Diddy didn't blink. He didn't flinch. This wasn't performance. He wasn't searching for pity. He wasn't begging for mercy. He had come to tell the truth finally. After all these years, this wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about taking the hit because he knew he had earned it. Then the judge cleared his throat. His voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. Mr. Combs, he said slowly, these are serious declarations. The court needs clarity, specificity. If there's more to this story, it must be made known clearly and directly. Diddy paused. This wasn't the direction anyone expected the trial to take. Not even him, but he knew it was time, the moment. To speak the truth had finally arrived, and he was done hiding. I'm talking about someone close to me, he said, locking eyes with the jury. Someone who's been there from the start, someone I trusted with everything. But I didn't see them for who they really were. They were part of the rise. And they were part of the fall. The silence that followed was seismic. You could feel it in your chest. The jury leaned forward slightly, visibly shaken. His own legal team looked stunned, like the floor had shifted under them. Across the aisle, the prosecution scrambled to recalibrate, sensing an opening they hadn't expected. But Diddy wasn't done. I'm not here to name names, he continued, his voice softer now, but unwavering. The people who were there they know, and I've let this betrayal rot inside me. I let it convince me I was alone. I buried it. Told myself it didn't matter, but it did. It does, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let it happen. I'm sorry I looked away. His voice cracked, not like a crack in armor, but like a dam finally giving way. There was no mask now, no PR polish. Just a man, vulnerable and exposed, confronting the ruin he'd helped create. You could feel it. This was no longer about courtroom tactics. This was a reckoning. The judge sat still, lips tight, processing. No one moved. No one even coughed. And for the first time since the trial began, the jury looked at Diddy with something. That wasn't scorn. It wasn't sympathy either, but it was human. They were no longer judging the mogul. They were watching the man. It wasn't the twist anyone expected. But it was the moment that shifted everything. No one knew what it meant yet. Would it help his case? Hurt it? That wasn't clear. But something fundamental had changed, and as Diddy returned to his seat, you could see it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the way his breath finally released. For the first time in years, he felt light. He had spoken the truth. Whatever came next, he could face it now. The courtroom held that silence like a secret, like a truth that couldn't be unheard. No one dared interrupt it. The weight of it all, the confession, the betrayal, the heartbreak, was still hovering in the air, refusing to let go. Diddy Dash, the icon, the titan, the architect of a cultural empire, now sat as something different. No longer armored, no longer untouchable, he had stripped everything back until all that was left was what had always been buried beneath the name. A man trying, finally, to be honest. His legal team sat stiffly, still catching up to what had just happened. They had prepared for redemption. They weren't ready for revelation. The narrative had fractured. The plan had changed. And now everyone in the courtroom knew nothing would ever be the same. The prosecution tried to regroup, tried to hold onto the image they'd built, the manipulator, the mogul who bent truth to his will. But what they were looking at now wasn't that man anymore. It was someone raw, someone fractured. Someone who had finally let the truth speak for itself. The jury watched him. Not just listening now, but looking, searching his eyes, his posture, his presence for the truth that had been hidden behind the empire, because now there was nothing left to hide. And across the aisle, the prosecutor stood. This was his moment to strike, but everything had changed. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor's voice sliced clean through the stillness like a knife across velvet. You've heard Mr. Combs admit to deception, to betrayal, to actions that dragged him into this courtroom. And now, after years of silence, he wants to speak of guilt and redemption. He turned to face them, his eyes sharp, his tone razor-edged. But let's not be distracted. Nothing he said changes what brought us here. The facts remain unchanged. His influence, his power, that's what he used to control, to manipulate, to betray the very people who built the foundation he now stands on. Diddy sat motionless, absorbing the words, but his eyes didn't drop. He wasn't begging. He wasn't running. Not anymore. He knew the truth was out, raw, exposed, irreversible, and now it was in the jury's hands. All he could do was hope they'd see past the spectacle and see the man underneath it. All. Were they buying it? Could they feel the difference between performance and truth? Or had the damage already been done? Too much, too late. He scanned the jury, their faces unreadable, masks carved in marble. But Diddy wasn't searching for mercy. He wasn't trying to escape. He was asking for something far harder: to be seen, to be understood, to be held accountable, and still believed in. I've made mistakes, he began, his voice steady but cutting through the air like broken glass. I've hurt people, the ones who believed in me, lifted me, stood by me. I turned my back on them, took their faith for granted. And for a long time, I couldn't even see what I'd done. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang between them. But now I do. I'm not here to plead for forgiveness. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here to ask for one thing: the chance to rebuild, to do better, to be the man I should have been all along. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. This wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't crafted in a legal war room. This was a man stripped of everything, letting the wreckage speak for itself. The jury sat motionless. The prosecution, for the first time, looked uncertain. They hadn't expected this turn. They expected denial, not confession. But Diddy had left the script behind. The defense finally moved, the lead attorney stepping forward to steer things back on course. He placed a hand on Diddy's shoulder, a silent signal, a gentle prompt. But Diddy shook his head. He didn't need coaching anymore. He wasn't delivering a defense. He was delivering the truth. I've spent a lifetime building something, he said, voice quieter now, but unshakably clear. A name, an empire, a legacy. But what good is it if it was built on lies? He took a breath. I can't erase the past, but I can own it, and I can rebuild, not just for me, but for every single person I hurt along the way. And in that moment, he meant it. It wasn't absolution, it wasn't closure, but it was real. And for the first time in years, Diddy felt the invisible weight lift. He had dragged the truth into the light, unfiltered, unpolished, and no matter what came next, prison, freedom, legacy lost, he had said it. He had finally said it. The room buzzed low with murmurs, but Diddy didn't hear them. All he could feel was his heart, pounding, alive, heavier and lighter at the same time. The silence after his words was suffocating. He sat back down, his pulse echoing in his ears. The courtroom's cold facade had cracked. The tension in the air had changed. It was no longer about strategy. It was about truth, and truth had come at a cost. Diddy had peeled back decades of image, decades of power, and in front of the world, admitted he'd failed. Admitted he'd used. Admitted he'd hurt, not as a tactic, but as a man finally staring into the mirror and refusing to look away. But not everyone was convinced. The prosecutor rose again, smirk just barely visible beneath his professional mask. He wasn't finished. He saw the jury's hesitation and moved quickly to shatter it. "Let's not be fooled by tears and testimony," he said coldly. "We've heard confessions. We've seen emotion. But let's remember what this really is." He gestured toward Diddy, sharp, deliberate. "This is not a man who made one mistake. These aren't isolated regrets. This is a pattern, a method, a career built on bending people, using them, abusing power." He walked slowly toward the jury, pausing between phrases. He didn't stumble into success. He climbed, step by step, using every person in his path. And now that the walls are closing in, he wants to be seen as human, as broken, as sorry. He turned fully to the box. But remorse without change, that's not redemption. That's survival. The room tensed again. The balance was shifting once more. And Diddy, he didn't move, he didn't argue. The moment for fighting had passed. All he could do now was wait, and wonder what they saw when they looked at him. A manipulator or a man finally willing to be judged? He had used people, discarded them, built an empire on their backs, then shut the door behind him. And now, sitting here in front of a jury, he was asking to be believed, to be seen as changed. But had he? The prosecutor's voice echoed like a blade across cold marble, and Diddy felt each word land. Not like before, not with rage, not with defensiveness, just impact. The sting wasn't about reputation anymore, it was about truth. And in that truth, he found something unfamiliar, stillness, because the prosecutor wasn't wrong. He had used people, bent the rules, crafted his rise with smoke and mirrors and loyalty spent like currency. But the man sitting there now wasn't that man anymore. At least, he hoped not. Still, that wasn't for him to decide. That power lay with the jury. Would they see him? Would they see past the headlines and the persona? Or would his past chain him forever to who he used to be? Across the courtroom, his lawyer finally rose, trying to regain control of a case that had slipped into uncharted territory. This wasn't the argument they planned. It wasn't the strategy, but it was real. And now they had to lean into it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the defense attorney began, steady but shaken. "What you just heard wasn't a performance. It wasn't a man trying to dodge consequences. It was a man confronting them. Mr. Combs isn't denying the pain he caused, he's acknowledging it. He's taking responsibility, fully, finally." There was a tremor in the attorney's voice, the weight of the moment pressing down even on him. Yes, he built an empire, he continued, and yes, that journey came with mistakes. But don't ignore what he's done since, the steps toward change, the effort to rebuild. The sincerity in that courtroom today. This trial isn't just about the past, it's about the future. And he's asking for a chance to prove he can still become the man he wasn't before. The jury listened, but Diddy could feel the battle was no longer about what was said, it was about what was felt. He wasn't just facing the legal system, he was facing the fallout of who he used to be. And in that moment, the courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like Judgment Day, not from 12 strangers. From himself. Could he actually rebuild? Could the man who once ruled by control learn to walk humbly through ruin? He didn't know, but for the first time, he was willing to find out. As the lawyer's final words echoed into silence, Diddy wasn't thinking about verdicts. His mind had drifted somewhere else years back. Before the lawsuits, before the trial, before the spotlight had burned so bright it blinded him. He remembered the nights of excess, the deals, the power plays, and the silence that followed long after the applause faded. The hollowness under all that noise. It was never the money. It was never the empire. It was the people. The ones who stood beside him, the ones he betrayed, and now he wondered, could they ever forgive him? Could he ever face them? Whispers began to stir in the room. The judge called for a recess. Both legal teams scattered, trying to reset. Diddy rose slowly. The weight on his chest made every step feel heavier than the last. But as he stepped out of that courtroom, something strange happened. He felt peace. Not comfort. Not relief. Just peace, the kind that only comes after you stop running. He had spoken the truth. And whatever happened next, he wouldn't have to lie to himself anymore. There were still landmines ahead, legal fights, broken relationships, headlines waiting to twist his words. But for the first time in years, he felt something else stir inside. Determination, resolve. He was going to fight, not for image, not for fame, for redemption. Outside, the sun was beginning to fall behind the skyline, casting long, golden shadows over the city that once crowned him king. But this wasn't his kingdom anymore, and he wasn't that king. He was something else now, a man who had finally learned what power couldn't buy: peace, forgiveness, a second chance. As he walked down the courthouse steps, Diddy could feel the weight of everything: his confession, the courtroom, the empire behind him still pressing on his shoulders. But this time, it wasn't crushing him. It was freeing him. And with every step, he walked closer to the only future that mattered. The one built not on control, but on truth. The courtroom remained in recess, but for Diddy, time felt like it had stopped. The usual chaos of breaks, legal whispers, media chatter, nervous glances faded to background noise. His mind wasn't on strategy anymore. It was on the storm inside him. The one he'd silenced for too long. He had poured everything out in that room, laid it bare. No filter, no facade. He wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew he had nothing left to hide. He glanced at the jury one last time before stepping out. Their faces unreadable, but something in their eyes had shifted. A flicker of recognition, not approval, not pity. Just understanding. Maybe it was the honesty. Maybe it was the pain. Maybe it was seeing a man not fallen but finally willing to stand. Whatever it was, Diddy knew one thing. He had finally shown them who he was. And whatever they decided, guilty, innocent, irrelevant, it would be based on the truth. His legal team was waiting just outside, huddled at a table littered with notes and strategies now rendered obsolete. Their voices were low, urgent, layered with tension. When he approached, his lead attorney looked up, calm but alert. "We've got a lot of work ahead," he said quietly. "That was an unexpected turn, Diddy. We don't know how they're going to play it, but we need to be ready." Diddy nodded. He was ready now for whatever came next. Diddy gave a quiet nod, the pressure in his chest almost unbearable. Legal strategies, courtroom maneuvers, it all felt meaningless now. He didn't care about the games. He cared about what came after. This moment wasn't just about avoiding a sentence, it was about reclaiming his soul. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for something much bigger. His future. his redemption, the chance to prove that a man, broken and fallen, could still rise again. "I'm done hiding behind my mistakes," he said, his voice low, raw. "I've faced them. I've said what I had to say. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. Because I can't go back, and I won't." The attorney standing beside him didn't speak right away. He just looked at Diddy really looked at him. And in that moment, he didn't see a music mogul or a public figure. He saw a man who had been torn apart and was still standing. "You're right," the lawyer finally said, steady but serious. "This trial, it's about more than law, it's about legacy. But I need you to understand what's coming next might be even harder. The jury, they might not see what we see. They might not accept it. All we have now is your truth." Diddy inhaled deeply and turned to face the people who had stood with him through this war. They had fought beside him, but the real battle wasn't theirs. It was his. He had exposed everything, no mask, no filters. Years of secrets poured into one moment of truth. The world could do what it wanted with that. But inside, he knew this wasn't about judgment anymore. It was about survival and salvation. The judge's voice summoned everyone back to court. As Diddy walked back inside, his focus sharpened. He had made a vow to himself, not the system. He wasn't going to let his past define him anymore. He wasn't going to be the man who let failures shape his future. There was still time, maybe not to fix everything, but to start again. Outside, the cameras waited. The media was hungry for spectacle. His fans, still there, but unsure. The empire he'd built, once a monument to power, now trembled on cracked foundation. The illusion was gone. Only the truth remained. And the truth would decide what kind of man he would become. As he stepped back into the courtroom, Diddy was no longer the man with the world at his feet. He wasn't defending an empire anymore. He was protecting something far more fragile, his humanity. He met the jury's gaze, and something was different. They weren't just looking at a defendant. They were looking at a man, one who had finally stopped pretending. Whether that would move them, he didn't know. But it had to be enough for him. The trial resumed like a wave crashing back into motion. The prosecution wasted no time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor's tone was razor sharp. You've just witnessed an emotional display, a moment of supposed remorse. But let's not lose our focus. He paced slowly, carefully. His voice cold, clinical. Yes, Mr. Combs confessed. Yes, he showed regret, but don't mistake confession for change. This is a man who has manipulated, deceived, and exploited everyone in his orbit to get where he is. Don't be fooled. This is a last-ditch play to avoid consequences. The prosecutor's voice sliced through the silence, but Diddy didn't blink. He had already spoken his truth. Whatever happened now wasn't in his hands anymore. He couldn't control the jury's perception, the judge's ruling, or the headlines that would follow. All he could control was himself. The man who had once used fear and ambition like weapons to build a dynasty was gone. The man now sitting before the court was someone else. Someone who had looked in the mirror and refused to lie to himself again. As arguments resumed, Diddy sat perfectly still. His heart was no longer racing. His mind no longer clouded by strategy or fear. No matter what verdict came, he had already won something greater. The strength to change, the courage to begin. No more running. He was ready for the long, brutal walk toward redemption. The courtroom buzzed around him, murmurs rising like static in a storm, but he didn't hear them. All he could hear was the echo of his own choices and the weight of what they had cost. He thought of the empire, the highs, the betrayals, and the moment just days ago when he'd laid it all bare. That was the moment it all changed. He never imagined his empire would come to this. But he'd never imagined he'd feel this free, either. Beneath the scars was clarity. Diddy glanced around. The jurors, the cameras, the strangers. They weren't here for the empire anymore. They were here for the aftermath. To witness whether a man could stare down his sins and still stand tall. He wasn't hiding behind money or fame or fear for the first time. He wasn't hiding at all. The prosecutor rose again, his tone colder now, sharper. His job wasn't to care. It was to tear Diddy down. The prosecutor went in hard, dissecting every line of confession, twisting every word of remorse, shaping it all into a calculated performance meant to avoid a prison cell. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, raising his voice, "we've all seen the act. We've seen his tears. We've heard the regret. But don't let emotion distract you from the evidence." He turned sharply to face them. "This is not a man who has changed. This is a man who regrets one thing and one thing only: the room went still, being caught." The prosecutor's voice sliced through the courtroom once again. "His actions have left scars, real damage to real people, and today he wants you to forget that." With a few tears, he paced slowly in front of the jury box. "But I urge, you don't let the performance fool you. Look past the theatrics. Look at the facts. Look at the trail of manipulation stretching across years." Diddy didn't react. He sat still and moved, unflinching. Not because he wasn't listening, but because his mind was far from that room. He was somewhere deeper, inside himself. In a place where silence echoed and memories burned. This wasn't about the prosecutor anymore. It was about something else, something more personal. A war he'd been fighting inside his own mind for years. For so long, he had convinced himself that his sins weren't sins, that they were just the price of success. That power absolved everything. He had buried the truth beneath the weight of money, fame, and the illusion of control. But now he saw it all clearly. He saw what it had cost him, and what it had cost the people who trusted him, the people who gave him their loyalty, and got betrayal in return. As his attorney rose to respond, Diddy didn't hear a word. He was locked in his own thoughts, memories flashing like lightning. His empire, once towering and untouchable, now looked small, insignificant, almost like it belonged to someone else. The applause, the power, the praise, all of it hollow now, because this wasn't about a brand anymore. It was about a man trying to remember who he really was, and more importantly, who he wanted to become. He knew his redemption wouldn't come from a courtroom win. That was never the point. It would come after. In the days that followed, in the rebuilding, the apologies, the effort, the honesty. Every day would be another opportunity to prove that he wasn't the same man who had built an empire on control and deception. The defense spoke with passion. They talked about his accountability, his change, his willingness to face the music. But Diddy knew none of that would matter if his actions didn't match his words. Redemption didn't come from lawyers. It came from showing up again and again and doing the hard work. That was what counted now, not the speeches, not the statements, just the truth, and what he did with it. The jurors watched, their expressions unreadable, but Diddy wasn't trying to win them over anymore. Not really. He had already said everything that needed to be said. His failures, his regrets, his truth. It was all out there. And now, it was no longer his to control. What he could control was what came next, how he rebuilt, who he chose to be, and whether or not he'd keep running from the man he used to be. He knew it would be a fight. The public would doubt him. Some would never forgive. But he wasn't afraid anymore, because the man who had once relied on power and manipulation was gone. And in his place stood someone ready to start over, ready to earn something real. The trial moved on, but a storm was building in his chest, the kind that didn't show on the outside but threatened to break through at any moment. He had kept control for so long, maintained the image, played the part, but now he understood vulnerability was the only way forward, the only way to heal. He couldn't hide anymore, couldn't deny what he had done, couldn't pretend to be the man he once thought he was. He had built an empire on illusion. Now it was time to build something better from the ground up. As the judge called for closing arguments, Diddy rose again, his heart heavy, his soul exhausted, but something else was there too. A quiet resolve, the outcome uncertain, but the path clear. He would have to earn back every ounce of trust he'd lost, not just from the people in that courtroom, but from the ones who had always believed in him, the ones he had let down, the ones he owed everything to. He was ready for that fight. It would take time. It would take pain, but it would be worth it. The jury now held his fate in their hands. But Diddy had finally taken control of his story. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. A beginning carved out of confession, shame, and truth. A beginning born from the ashes of who he used to be. A beginning only he could walk. They deliberated for hours. Each tick of the clock stretched like a lifetime. Diddy sat alone in a small holding room, a single wooden table, a dim light, his fingers tapping quietly in rhythm with his thoughts. Everything hung in the balance. 12 strangers now decided what the world would see him as: a criminal, a liar, a man. He didn't know, but he did know that nothing would ever be the same again. The last few weeks had drained him. The courtroom, the testimony, the raw honesty. He had stood naked before the world and told them who he was. No script, no mask, and it had nearly broken him. But it was the hardest thing he had ever done because it was the right thing. The man he had once been, the mogul, the kingmaker, was gone, and the image he had worn like armor had shattered. All that remained was truth. Would it be enough? Could they look beyond his sins and see his struggle? Could they see not just the man he had been, but the one he was fighting to become? Footsteps echoed in the hallway. His attorney entered, calm on the surface, but his eyes carried the strain of a man who knew how much was at stake. He sat down slowly and placed a folder on the table. "They're close," he said quietly. "Deliberations have been long, emotional, but I can tell they're listening. They're weighing everything." Diddy nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The words were meant to be reassuring, but reality cut deeper. No matter the verdict, something inside him had changed. He had turned the mirror on himself. He had let the world see. There was no erasing that, no undoing it. All he could do now was live with it. He glanced toward the window. The sky was dimming, a fading sun cast long shadows across the floor. It was the perfect reflection of what he felt inside. Uncertainty, but not fear, not anymore. He had spent his entire life building a legacy, towering, glittering, untouchable. But beneath the surface of that empire was rot. It was never built on truth. It was stitched together with power plays, with manipulation, with lies he told others and himself. And when it all came crashing down, he didn't deny it, because somewhere in the rubble of his fall, something finally broke open. This wasn't just about a courtroom. This wasn't just about guilt or innocence. This was about a man finally confronting the parts of himself he had kept locked away for years. The headlines would say the trial changed him, but it wasn't just the trial. It was everything that had come before: the betrayals, the people he used, the bridges he torched without a second thought. And now, the weight of it all sat heavy on his chest. Diddy Combs knew, deep down, he'd become someone he didn't recognize. He had chased validation. He had devoured success like it was oxygen. But none of it mattered anymore, not in this moment. Now, what mattered was how he treated people, how he would repair what he broke, and how he would rebuild not an empire, but himself. Then the door creaked open. The judge had returned, and just like that, the wait was over. Diddy's heart stuttered in his chest. The verdict, his future, was about to be spoken aloud. His lawyer motioned for him to rise. He stood up, and as he walked back into the courtroom, something unexpected washed over him. Peace. Because this wasn't about the verdict anymore. Not For him, this was about finally taking responsibility for who he had become. The courtroom buzzed as people shuffled into their seats. Then silence, the kind that hangs heavy thick with expectation. Diddy stood between his attorneys, fists clenched by his sides. He could feel every eye on him. Still, he kept his gaze forward. The jury foreperson rose. A paper unfolded. A breath held. Then, we, the jury, find the defendant, Sherlock Holmes, guilty on the charges presented. Time didn't just slow, it collapsed. That word guilty, it pierced him. He had feared it, prepared for it, but hearing it, that was different. It was real now. His chest tightened. His lungs refused to cooperate. And for a moment, he stood suspended, numb, shaken, shattered. But then came another voice. Calm, steady, judicial. The judge. However, the judge said the jury recommends leniency in sentencing, recognizing the defendant's cooperation, his self-reflection, and his commitment to making amends. Diddy blinked. The courtroom stayed still. He didn't move. This wasn't the verdict he had dreamed of. But it wasn't the nightmare, either. The guilt was still real. The shame still raw. But now, there was room for something else. To hope. The judge continued, outlining the sentence: probation, a fine, community service. Not absolution, not freedom, but a path forward, a narrow one. But it was there, and Diddy was grateful. Not because he had escaped, but because he had a chance to make things right. As the judge's words faded, Diddy could feel the room shift. Eyes locked onto him. Reporters, onlookers, critics, supporters, haters. All waiting for his reaction. But Diddy gave them nothing. No tears. No outbursts. Just silence, because he wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about what came next. The trial had ended, but the real battle, the one that mattered, was just beginning. The headlines would write one story, but Diddy knew the truth. This wasn't the end. This was day one. The damage was real. The fallout would last, but he would do the work. He had to. He stepped out of the courtroom. No cameras could capture what was really happening inside him. He had been judged. And now he had to live with it. He wasn't going to let this define who he would become. Not anymore. This moment, it would be the foundation for a new kind of empire. One built on truth, on accountability, on something real. The road would be long. It would be brutal, and he would stumble again, but for the first time in years, he felt strong enough to walk it. Not to restore what he had, but to earn what he never did. Redemption. The trial was over. The fight had only just begun, and Diddy, he was ready.